All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to change my background color so we can see. That's good enough. Over here, if you're turning it in. Thank you. We're going to create a NURB sphere. And you don't have to follow along with this. I mean, follow along up here. You don't have to actually do it. But I'm going to animate this ball bouncing, okay? And we're going to go over some of the foundational principles that we're going to need for when we do the bouncing ball animation. One of the things that I like to do right off the bat when I do any kind of animating is I like to make sure that everything's kind of zeroed out. Everything's, you know, I can go back to a state where I can reset it and it goes back to exactly where I want it to start. So here, if I go and reset my translate Y, you'll see that, I can't type, you'll see that it goes into the graph, into the grid here. I don't like that, okay? So what I do is I typically put it in the spot I want it to start in, and then I go to modify and I freeze the transforms. And freezing the transforms will zero out all of these, but keep it exactly where it's at, okay? And I also delete the history. So I'm going to go through and delete the history. And then anytime we do an animation, whoops, I make sure that my preferences are set to 30 frames per second. Right now I'm at 24, so I'm going to go to settings, change that to 30, hit save, reset all my buttons here. There we go. Good. Okay, so now I'm going to make him bounce. When we do the bouncing ball animation, we do it the same way we did the stick animation, is that we focus on one attribute at a time. Don't try to do everything at the same time because you're not going to be able to do everything at the same time. So I'm going to go with the translate Y first. And before, when we did the stick animation, we only had one attribute over here, okay? We didn't have the X, Z, and all this other stuff. We had one attribute. So instead of us going through and right-clicking on this all the time and hitting key selected, which we could do, I'm going to go under animation, under animate, and go to the set key. This is actually like when we hit S, that's what happens. Go to that option box. And I'm going to say I want to use all keyable attributes from the channel box. That means whatever I have selected, when I hit S, it sets a key just for that item, okay? So I set a key, and now if I go up to frame 20, let's say, and hit S again, it only sets it for what I have selected. If I don't have anything selected in there, and I hit S, it sets it for everything. So you have to be aware of that, okay? As you're animating, keep an eye on your channel box. If you see that salmon color all over the place, you know that something's gone wrong and you don't want that. So you want to figure out where your keys are that you don't need. It might be going into the graph editor and deleting all these extra keys. It might be whatever. However it is, you get rid of all those extra keys. All right. So with the bouncing ball, at frame 1, he is on the ground. That's where he is, okay? When he goes up in the air, that's let's say, we estimate everything. We don't know how long it's going to take for him to go up and for him to come down, so we just estimate. So let's say it takes 15 frames for him to go up. Come on. And then I set a key on translate Y, and then it takes another 15 frames for him to come down. We set that to 0 and set a key. And then it takes another 15 for him to go up. Go up another 15. Okay. This process of going ahead 15, changing values, and setting keys is entirely too repetitive. Okay? If we know that at 1, 30, and 60 he's on the ground, and then at 15 and 45 he's in the air, we can just go through and just set those keyframes to make it a lot easier for us. Okay? So at frame 1, I know he's going to be here. At frame, I'm just going to go to 20. I know he's going to be there. At frame 40, he's going to be there. At frame 60, he's going to be there. At frame 80, 100, 120. Okay? I know he's on the ground at every one of those frames. Then I'm going to cut each one in half. I go here, I pull it up, I set a key. I want to do the same thing here, but I can't left click and drag because it updates my time slider. So I middle click and drag. It doesn't update my time slider, then I can just set a key. Middle click, set a key. Middle click, set a key. Middle click, set a key. Okay, so very quickly, I've gotten the keyframe set for this animation. Okay? So think about those little things that you can do to say, at what point can I just kind of go through and set keyframes for this when I know it should be at that stage, okay? Think of a character, because sometimes when you're doing a character, the character is here and then they're over here, okay? And you might want to say, okay, I want to keep them there, so I'm going to set a key here, and I'm going to go up 100 frames and set a key back here, because I know he's going to come back to that position, okay? So instead of having to put him here and then figure out what those values are, you can just go ahead and do that. All right, so now we have this animation going. Now it doesn't look like the ball is bouncing. It merely looks like the ball is moving up, moving down, moving up, moving down. So just based on this, what's one thing I can do to this to make it look more like it's bouncing and not just moving? I could squash and stretch it. That would be one thing. But just dealing with the Y right now. Just dealing with that translate Y. Right, the speed. So right now, if we go to the graph editor, all of my tangents are ease in, ease out. Okay, if I zoom in on one keyframe right there, you can see exactly what's happening. It's slowing down before it hits the top, and it's slowing down before it hits the bottom. There's no reason that the ball would slow down before it hits the ground. Okay, if I drop a marker, it does not slow down as it moves further down. It speeds up. Okay, the only thing that stops it from continuing to go down is the fact that it hit the desk. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I need to do is I need to tell all of these keyframes on the bottom that they should be linear keyframes. Okay? And the reason for that is because there should be no slowing. It's going up. Yes, there's going to be slowing, because as you throw something into the air, gravity takes over. Gradually it slows down, and then it starts falling. And then as it falls, it picks up speed, picks up speed, picks up speed. And it's going to keep picking up speed until something else hits it and stops it from picking up speed. Okay, so I'm just going to play this again. Just by adding that linear on the bottom, you can tell that the animation looks a lot stronger already. Just having that bounce in there. Okay, we'll do this again. I'll flatten it out so you can see what it looked like before. Here it looks more like a wobble, like it's just oscillating back and forth. Here, it actually looks like it's hitting the ground and bouncing back up. Okay? Now, I can exaggerate that because we're doing animation. We have that ability to do that kind of stuff. So I can go in here, and I can grab these keyframes here, and I can just manipulate these to exaggerate that motion. And you'll see I'm only manipulating one of these. The other handlebar is going with it, which is fine for this little demonstration at the moment. Okay. Okay. So now it looks a little bit funky because it's actually not doing a consistent speed down there. It actually is. If I zoom in on one of these, there is a little bit of slowing down happening right here. Okay. So in this case, I am going to break these. I'm going to take all these handlebars, and I'm going to click the break thing. And now I can edit them individually. So I can say this is going to go up, this is going to go up. And I'm going to take each one of these handlebars and pull it up. And that's going to allow me to create more of a exaggeration that the ball kind of goes upwards, hangs for a minute, and then starts to fall again. Kind of like in a cartoon when they do that. All right, so that should be good except for this guy. He needs to be up as well. Okay. So now if we rewind this, and I reset this to 120. Okay, now we're getting that exaggeration where it looks like that ball is actually kind of coming up and then slamming back down again. Okay? Alright, so now what I can do is go through this and tweak some of these. Right now the ball is moving, or it's going up the same rate every single time. Okay? Imagining that the ball had some initial force, some reason to do its first bounce, every bounce after that would progressively be lower and lower. Okay? If you bounce a basketball once, it goes up to a certain height, and then it bounces again and goes up less, and it bounces again and goes less, and it bounces again and goes less. Okay? Until you get that little shuddering effect at the end of it. Alright? So we'd have the same kind of effect here. So if I just take these and just lessen this, I can turn my snapper on. Okay, I'm going to get this weird bump because my handlebars need to be adjusted. That's fine because I can go through these, grab my handlebars, oops, and just tweak them. This needs to come down more, this needs to come down more. Alright, and then each one of these handlebars. Let me just re-grab these and make them linear. There we go. And then I can go back and adjust the ones I need to. That should be good there. Okay. Okay, so let me scoot this up so you can actually see that better. Okay, so the first bounce looks good. The second bounce looks okay, but then it gets progressively like faker and faker as we go. Why is it looking faker and faker as we go?
Same time.
Same time, right? The same air time, the same amount of time in the air, we can't have that. If the ball bounces up 5 feet, and the next time it bounces up 2 feet, the next time it bounces up 1 foot, each time would become progressively less and less and less. Okay, so I can do that in here, I can do that in the dope sheet. The dope sheet is typically easier to just kind of move the keyframes around. So I can say, here's my first bounce, so it starts off here, bounces up, comes down. So the next time, it should be less. So I'm going to shrink that. Shrink that. The next time it should be even less. So it's less than there. And the next time it should be even less than that. I keep this up too because it's easier to kind of visualize what's happening over there. And these guys are going to be pretty close like that. Okay, and if you can't visualize it in here as to where the bounces are, then just do it in here. Okay, just set this up. Use your lock here so that we can only grab these and move them in the one direction and do it there. Okay, so now we've lessened that time between these. I think I probably still have some, like these guys look like they're pretty close to the same distance. That's 10 frames, that's 11 frames. Let me shrink that. I'm also going to bring this down. All right, so that's 13, that's 10, that's 9. There we go. Okay, so let's try that and see how that looks now. Okay, so there now it looks like the ball is actually coming up and then doing its bounces that it should have. Okay, it looks more realistic because we've taken into account some physical properties. We've taken into account that it's not going to go up as high every time, and we've taken into account that it's not going to have the same time for each bounce. Okay, and just those couple things inside here, creating a graph that looks like that makes that animation work. Okay, now there's still some things that we could tweak in here. Maybe this guy we could pull up. This guy we could pull up a little bit. Okay, we can tweak those a little bit more. We can tweak these a little bit more. That's good there. There we go. So now it actually looks like it is falling and it looks much more appropriate. And you'll see that our time now, instead of 120, we're at 62. Okay, so we basically cut that time in half by manipulating the keyframes. So now that we have the translate Y okay, we can still tweak it some. The next thing we can do is add some of that translate X in there. Okay, so I'm just going to reset this to -12. There we go. I'm going to set a key on this. I'm going to go up to the end of this one and set this to about a +12. And then rewind it and hit play again. I can also shrink my time to 63. Okay, So how does that look? Do we see anything wrong with it?
Doesn't have a natural roll.
It doesn't have a natural roll, that's one thing. If we watch the animation though, look at how little it moves in the X direction right at the beginning. Right in this phase right here, it moves very little, then all of a sudden it takes off. Okay? So again, we'll go into the graph editor. And some of these things, you know, it's hard to see when you're looking at this and your instructor is asking you questions. But it's a lot easier to see it in the graph editor. It's a lot easier to see this and say, okay, it shouldn't be doing that at the beginning. Okay? If this is its first bounce, it should be going the fastest here typically. All right, so we can take this and pull it up. Now at the end, yeah, it might be slowing down at the end. Okay? So we'll leave that one the way it is and just see how it looks. So we rewind it, we hit play. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too much. It's going to be launched now. All right, so just take that down a little bit. I'll even take this down a little bit like that. That's better. Okay, so now that looks more appropriate. It looks like the ball is doing what it should be doing at that stage. Okay, and again, this is two keys. I've set one at the beginning, one at the end, and I've just tweaked that graph just to maintain the speed that I want to maintain at the time I want to maintain it. All right, so now, there it is, beautiful. So now I can go to rotate, and I can set my rotate up. So I'm going to go to my rotate Z. I'm going to key it. I could have just hit S. I'll go to the end. I'll rotate this a few times. Hit set key. Okay. Anything wrong with the rotation?
Yeah, it could be linear.
Right. It should be pretty much linear, right? Also, it's probably not rotating enough. Even though I spun it around, it looked like a considerable amount of times at the end, it's only rotating like 1 and not even a half times. Okay? It's like, 1 and 90 degrees. So I'm going to go to the rotate. I'm going to make it, I'll probably make it the same kind of graph because I think there should be probably some slowing down on there, something like that. But I'm going to take this and make it, 960. Okay, and again, I'll check my graph because I adjusted the time. I need to adjust the keyframes. There we go. Now when we get to something like this that's high action, it's kind of hard to see actually what's going on. Okay? Yeah, it looks like it's working. It looks good. It looks realistic. But sometimes it helps just to kind of go like this and watch it and see what the ball is doing. Yeah, that looks pretty good actually. Okay? Another thing we can do is under animate, we could turn on what's called ghosting. And this allows us to see different frames and see where the ball is at those different frames. So I'm going to go to custom frame steps. I'll say 6 before, 6 after, and a step of 2. Okay, so I hit ghost. And so now what we're seeing is what is this ball doing 12 frames, because we're doing it every other frame, 12 frames up, and then 12 frames back, there's nothing behind it. Okay, so as we hit play or we scrub, we can see what the ball is doing at those frames. And it gives us a good indicator as to if there's any funky movement in here. Sometimes you'll do an animation and there's just like some funky glitch. Something happens, I don't know where it's at or where it's happening. But now we can see definitely any weird glitches that are in here. Okay, and then I can go to animate and I can say unghost selected. All right. So then I can also work on some of these other things. I could say, okay, well, you know what? I like the way that the Y is moving. I know that's good. I don't need to keep seeing it move in the Y direction. I want to see just what the rotation's doing with the translate X. So I can right click on any one of these and I can say mute selected. So muting it keeps the keyframes there but just turns them off, just like on your volume control. So now if we look at this, we're only looking at that animation of the rotation and the translate X. Okay? And this is again a good indicator as to whether this is working. If it looks like the ball is rolling correctly on here, then most likely it's going to look like it's rolling correctly when we're animating it. Okay? If I took that animation and I cranked it really far up, that's 2000. I'll even do this. I'll even make this really weird, like that. There you go. Okay, there I could see something's wrong, but now if I go and unmute this Y, I can't see something's wrong, okay? Now if I rendered this out with motion blur would pick that up because it's registering how fast that object is moving. So we would have this nice clear ball going like this because it's not a whole lot of movement. And then when it does that super fast rotation that way, we would get this big blurry ball and then it would go back to the clear ball, okay, or the clean one. So it's always good to be able to isolate these things, muting the individual objects, and then watching it go, or even frame by frame, watching it go. And then you can see, whoa, something's going on there, okay? Sometimes it's hard to see that, even in the graph editor, if you're not zoomed in correctly. If I'm here and I click on Translate Z, I'm like, oh, that's probably good. Okay? Or if I'm like this, I can see it doesn't really look like there's a whole lot of movement in Translate Z until I zoom in on it and then say, wow, that looks messed up. Or Rotate Z. Right, set this back to -960. That's good. Let's frame that. Let's fix this. So that's good there. All right. So unmute this. Okay. All right. So that part is working. The next part we would want to do in this is to add that squash in there. Okay. Now the way that I animated this is I just kind of arbitrarily threw a rotate value in there. I can't do that when I do my squashing because the way that the squash and the stretching is going to work is kind of imperative as to how we do all those rotations. For instance, if I take this and I squash it, and we talked about this before, that I can't simply just go like this and that's squashing it. Okay? You have to actually look at the volume of what this guy entails. Okay? He can't lose volume. He can't lose what is actually creating him. If I take this can and I squish it like this, okay, parts of this are kind of stretching out a little bit. Not a whole lot, not like our bouncing ball. So what I want to do is I want to pull it out like this and go down like that. Okay? So essentially these values here are maintaining about the same volume. Okay? It's not ridiculous like this, and it's not like that. Okay? That would not work for what we're doing. If we're doing exaggerations, we're doing something more animated, we could do that, but we're not. Okay? And if I set a key on this, I go up a frame or two, and I stretch it back out. Okay, so you see here it's squashed, there it's stretched. As it comes like this, you can see now it's like flopping over. And that doesn't really make sense as to why it would be stretching in that fashion. Okay, and then when it hits the ground here, it should be flat again. So then I would go through and I would flatten this out. So this method, with just kind of arbitrary rotations here, isn't really working. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that my rotations are 180 degrees every time it hits the ground. So right here, instead of this being -500-ish, this should be -180. Okay, so I'm going to set a key on that. Now watch how nicely the ball rolls over. It just goes whoop. All right, now we had to fix that tangent because that tangent's messed up. Anytime you add a keyframe in there, your tangent you can see is kind of screwy, so I have to just fix that. That's good. So now, nice and arced. Okay. That's perfect. So now I can go through this process and I can flatten it out like this and like that. And I'm going to go to the frame before it and I'm going to stretch it out the other way. Now, right now I'm not caring about the numbers. In the video I care about the numbers. So now you can see as this thing comes in, it's going to look like it's squashing on the ground. Okay, and then as it comes back to this side, right here, it's going to be stretched out. And then right here, it's going to be like that again. Okay, so here's this. It stretches out like that. I also like to take the top here and just reset these back to 1. Okay, so here's our bounce. Boing. Okay, so that's what we have set up for the bounce and the squash. If we had those rotations in there, that wouldn't work. That whole process, it would look like a flipping pancake that lands. Okay, it can't look like that. All right, so we're looking at this thing. Let me turn my ghosting on so we can see this better. Ghost selected. I'm going to go up 10 and 2. That should be good. Nope, more. Oh, that's why. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at this animation that we have here. This is usually the part that people get mixed up on the most. So close. Let me shrink this and put it over there on the projector. There we go. Okay, when it hits the ground here, and I get a darker marker. When it hits the ground here, it's flat, okay? So that's the force. That's the impact of the ball hitting the ground, flattens it out. What propels it forward is this stretching right here. So this stretching going in this direction is what makes it go as high as it goes. Once it hits the top of this, it's kind of back to its original shape. As it falls, gravity is pulling it, the wind is pushing that way, it stretches out again. Okay? And then when it hits the ground, we go back into that flattened out shape. And that process repeats for each one of these bounces. Okay? Now keep in mind too that we also have the gradation of it's high here, lower, lower, lower. Eventually it'll be not affecting it. Okay? So at this point, yeah, it's good, it's going up and bouncing down. Oops. Unghost all. When we get to this one, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to do that same kind of squash here. At this point, it's going to be stretched out again. And I'm not being very careful with the numbers here. You will be when you do yours. When we get to the top, again, we'll be at 0 or at 1 for this. When we get back down to this side, his rotation should be negative 360. And then he'll be flattened back out again. And then right before it, he'll be stretched out again, like that, like that. Okay, so he comes up. Okay, and then we do that same process for, typically we do it for the first 3 bounces, and then after those first 3 bounces, then it just goes into just a regular, no squashing or stretching because the ball's not moving enough to squash or stretch. Okay, we don't have enough time in these guys here to do any real squashing or stretching. There's 43 is where this one starts and 52 is where it ends. If we added the squashing and stretching into each one of these, it would be no time. It would be like squash, stretch, regular, squash, stretch, back. Okay. We could probably add it into this guy. That's our 4th one, yeah. But definitely not this one or this one. Okay. Okay. Now we also have, if we look at, because we edited that, if we squash this down, you see that it comes away from that ground plane. So eventually we're going to have to move those back down, okay, to get that to work. Now we're also going to have to, if we look at this animation, you see how fast this goes, is that our viewer might not really catch the fact that this squashes down right here because it happens so fast. Remember that each frame down here is 1/30th of a second, so that squashing is only happening within one frame of that, and we just don't see that quickly. So typically what we do when we do the actual assignment is we have 2 keyframes for every time it hits the ground. That way we're allowed to just have a little bit more time in the bottom for the ball to actually make contact and for the viewer to see what's happening down there. Okay? So this is where I could take this. Let me scoot this keyframe over. Paste. Come on. And I could just copy this keyframe, or I can just middle click. That's the easier way. And then just reset keys for some of these other ones. Okay, so now we're able to see that a little bit better because we're at that frame just a little bit longer, just an extra frame in there, or at that position longer. That frame in there allows us to kind of get a better view of what's happening. Okay, even if it's like in that same position. Which one did I forget to set? Oh, my Y. There. That. There we go. Okay. So once you're done with this, this is what the animation is going to look like. Sorta, kinda. You'll have your own take on it. Drive the Sarcona. Oops. Demo 2040 work. Okay, and I added these rings in here just to have something else in the scene. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something else to make it look interesting. That's it. Students in the past have created little blocks that they jump over, or some of them created like a little button that starts the ball like propelling, which is kind of a neat thing. Okay, but you can see the ball actually looks like it's doing that for a reason. It has a purpose and it has like a nice little flow to it. Okay, when it hits the ground, it feels like the ball's kind of squishy and hits the ground, with some realism. The only part that looks kind of weird, and it's just because of the video, but it doesn't really look like it goes through that ring, but it does. It happens so quickly. See, even that one right there, because of the motion blur, it looks like it goes through it, but it doesn't. Or it looks like it doesn't go through it, but it does. Okay, and that was a bit of a trick, just getting these things timed up so that they would spin correctly. Now I didn't put the rings in there and then animate the stuff. I animated the stuff and then I added the rings in and just kind of fit it into where it should go. Also, because the ball is rolling, you'll see that the ball has lines on it so that we can see the rotation. Okay, so when you texture these things, they have to have that rotation on there so we can see, or that texture on there so we can see the rotation. Okay, and again, we're using nice, strong camera movement that allows us to see the entire animation. It's nothing crazy. You'll see some examples in the video of crazy camera moves. Okay. Now the assignment for this one is we have 2 seconds of rolling at the beginning. We have 3 major bounces, a couple minor bounces just to help transition it, and then 2 more seconds of rolling at the end. Okay? Now I'm not going to count frames, but I know how long the animation should be at least. Okay? So if we look at this, this is 7 seconds and 12 frames. So just a little quick math, if I can type. 7 times 30 plus 12, there you go, 222 frames. That's how long my animation was about. All right, so this first part here, this 2 seconds of rolling, how many frames is 2 seconds of rolling? 60. Okay, so at the end, how many frames is 2 seconds of rolling then? 60. So we have 60 frames at the beginning, 60 frames at the end. That's 120, and your bounce is going to be in the middle of that. Okay, so that's what your animation, just as far as timing goes, how you can figure out your timing of all that. Okay, so that's the bouncing ball, and this is going to be just like it's in the video that I have. It's on. It's not on the resources. I can put it on there. At least I don't think I put it on there. No, I didn't. Okay. It's on Angel. You log into Angel, you can watch the video. when I walk you through it, it walks you through essentially the same way, but it's doing it more towards the way of the assignment, not just going through the bullet points of, here's some of the stuff that you're going to have to pay attention to. Okay? So if you have any question as to, you know, how are you doing this or how are you doing that, watch the video, or you can ask me, obviously. But you should definitely, not that, there it is. Make sure you go through the video, watch the video, follow along with it. I recommend anytime you do any of the videos that I give you is to watch it first, at least like, you know, kind of skip through it and get an idea of what's happening. For this video, you really don't need to because I've already done it. But at least get an idea of what's happening, and then you can go through and do your stuff to it. Okay? These tools and techniques that we're doing on this one will take you right into the next assignment once you're done with that. And I'll go more into this one. If people are ready for it, I'll go into a next class. But this is going to be the next assignment, is that we're taking that motion of taking the ball and rolling it this way and having it roll and having it bounce, and we're applying it to something like this. Okay? And we obviously have a little bit more going on here than just the ball bouncing and going across the screen. So you have to make sure when you do this bouncing ball assignment that you have a good grasp on those setting keyframes, editing stuff in the graph editor, getting your timing right. That's really important, especially on these. Each one of these ramps is gradually more steep. Okay, so each one is going to go faster and faster and faster as it comes down. The ball slows down about here, and then it rolls down the ramp. Okay, now it does do something against physics, which is it goes higher than it started. Okay, there's no way physically, if the ball stops here and just rolls down, nothing else is impacting it, then it could get higher than it started. But that's part of the animation. That's part of just like the fun of that assignment. Okay. You're not modeling anything in this scene, but everything in the bouncing ball one you're modeling. So you're modeling the ground and you're modeling the ball. Okay. All right, are there any questions on that assignment, on the bouncing ball? Okay.